So, good morning, everyone. Welcome to this very special edition of the Startup Showcase. And technically, from the marketing calendar, Women's Day, we're all supposed to do something, but really, this is not about that alone. We have a lot of respect and gratitude for the fantastic work that women entrepreneurs, leaders, people like Anjali, who are from the investment world, they've been doing so much of excellent contributions to the ecosystem. And it becomes our responsibility also to showcase this in as many ways as we can do. So, without further ado, this is Vijeta here. I'm from the Type Bangalore team. It's an honor, a privilege, and we are so grateful for you wonderful women entrepreneurs and leaders who are coming together, and to all the audience who have joined us.
Over to you, Anjali.
Thank you. Thank you, Vijeta, and to TIE Bangalore for giving us this opportunity to showcase, women entrepreneurs and founders today. A quick introduction to myself before I go on to introduce Veena, Bhamini, and Mauri. I'm from Waterbridge Ventures. We are a seed to Series A early stage VC, and we invest anywhere from 250K to 2.5 million in tech-led early stage companies that are building from India or for India. We have four partners, two offices, if offices mean anything at all in today's virtual world, and look forward to a wonderful next 60 minutes getting to know more about how Veena set out to build Monroe and how Bhamini and Mauri set out to build Big Fat Phoenix. So I'll now move on to introducing Veena. Veena is the founder of Monroe Shoes. Monroe is a D2C brand, is a millennial-friendly footwear brand where she believes fashion meets comfort. And we always speak about gender biases with design. And Veena also truly believes that we need footwear for women designed by women. So Veena, over to you, and look forward to learning more about Monroe.
Absolutely. Thank you, Anjali. Hi to everybody. Happy Women's Day. I think one day if we're getting celebrated, I totally want to like soak in all the celebrations. Just a bit on myself. I think if I had to describe myself, I'm the most passionate fashion lover of this planet, right? I've remained true to my love. I've let go of IIM Calcutta to be part of NIFT, convinced my parents that no, trust me, I'll make it big here, right? Purely out of passion and also strong belief that as humans, we do very well when we are made comfortable, right? It's a very emotional need. And how do you fill this need? Passion is a very powerful emotional need filler, right? And that's what we do at Monroe, right? We make comfort zones for women, and footwear happens to be our first category. And yeah, as we share further, I will tell you how from designing shoes to like making comfort zone for people who are part of Monroe, we just thrive in our own comfort zone. Thank you.
Thanks, Veena. Bhamini, over to you for a quick introduction.
Hey folks, thanks Anjali and thank you TIE and everyone for being here. I'm Bhamini Lakshminarayan. I'm one of the co-founders in a team of larger founders at Big Fat Phoenix Interactive, where we're building video games because we think that video games have an extraordinary potential to be immersive, fun experiences, but can also do more. And we'll talk about that more when we go into talking more about the products that we're building. Over there, I'm head of design, but it's a startup, so you wear many hats. So I'm also, so aside from thinking about what kind of games we want to build, the kind of overall experience we want kids to have, the fun factor, as people put it, games should essentially be fun all the time. I also invest a lot of time, effort, and energy in thinking through the culture that we want to build and sustain as a startup, as a thing, whereas we have the opportunity to build this kind of space that we want to work in. At my core, I'm a geek. I love storytelling. I love video games, comic books. And they've really shaped who I am as a person. And they shape the kind of work that I find myself doing, and hopefully will help shape other people too.
Thanks, Bhamini. Marvi, over to you.
Anjali, thank you. Thank you everyone for being here bright and early on a Monday morning. I'm Morvi. I'm along with Bhamini, one of the co-founders of Big Fat Phoenix, and we'll get more into that. But at Big Fat Phoenix, like Bhamini said, what we're trying to do is to do more with games and to particularly change the value perception of games in parents' heads when they see games as something that is to be done in your like free time, your break time, where nothing of like importance is really happening, and we're here to try and like subvert that. And we'll get more into the details later. My particular area of focus is leading the learning design of all our products. So defining what our games are, of what the goals for each one of our games are. Is the learning really coming out? Is it being surfaced to the player and the parent? And also just making sure that every single thing that we create is super fun, because like there is no point in designing anything otherwise. I've also grown up immersed in a lot of storytelling. Like literally the only thing I've ever done is read a lot. I've also moved a lot. Like I've lived in 16 cities in so far in my life, right? And my books have kind of like moved along with me wherever I've gone. And I was like thinking the other day that this is kind of like both of these things have become really like central, because my books became like the one continuity in this life, right? So now, especially now that working in kids media, where the storytelling is central to every single thing that you do, but also like working with such a young startup, you have to be adaptable to constant change. So yeah, I'm really happy to be here. Very excited to share what we're building.
Awesome. I think that's like a fantastic primer before we start dwelling into the details. So I'll now hand the screen to Veena, and would be great to share a few slides. Tell us about your journey behind building Monroe Shoes and where you are today.
Absolutely. Thank you, Anjali. I want to quickly share. So are you able to see my screen?
Yes,
Yeah. So I think.
perfect.
I want to. Before I dive into Monroe, I want to share why am I doing it, and how do I manage to like sustain in it, right? Um, my earliest memory of my love for fashion was when I was 7 years old. In my school, I said I want to become fashion businessman. And it's also because my father is an entrepreneur, so I'm like a third generation entrepreneur. So if somebody dissected my DNA, they can see ROI written in it, right? So very sharp. And also I think I come from a Marwadi background, so a lot of ancestral wisdom. So I would say three reasons why I'm doing this. Just pure love for fashion, right? It's a very passionate thing for me to be part of this space. Second, there's a lot of ancestral wisdom. There's a lot of upbringing, childhood, I could say incubation that happened to me that has made me more confident of myself as an entrepreneur. Third, I see a big opportunity, right? I see a monetary outcome. I see value creation, and I see how my ancestors would be happy with this value outcome, right? Let's dive in and let's see what Monroe really means. When I was in New York, I would at Subway change a pair of shoe and slide in another pair of shoe and then change it back. I hated it, right? And that moment, I had promised myself that women should not go through this, right? This is redundant, and somehow I will figure out how not to make women hustle between looking good and feeling comfortable. Why can't we do both, right? And that's when Monroe was born, right? Monroe is a love child of fashion plus comfort. We are a D2C brand, so we primarily focus on building an emotional connect directly with our consumers, whether through selling to our own website, whether through selling to our own conversational commerce over WhatsApp. Um, what have we done right so far? I would say four things, right? Founder led team. So there's a lot of founder market fit that's happening. That's a huge favor for us. Successful product market fit, right? Strong digital game with omni channel presence, right? And a very high margin model. I will not dig in deep into everything, but I'll dig in deep into two, and I will explain how my gender helped me, right? So it's not a disadvantage all the time. Sometimes if you know how to take advantage of your gender, you can actually make money out of it, right? Let's talk about the team. I've been very blessed that my energy has attracted similar kind of people. So they say your vibe attracts your tribe. So here's the tribe at Monroe, right? So you can look at a wide variety of expertise of different kinds of people who are building Monroe. So whether it's, let's say, somebody like Sakshi, who's an expert at D2C marketing, or whether it's Joel, who's an expert at performance marketing, right? Now, one quick advantage I took as a woman founder, I took EQ test, right? A lot of people don't talk about it, but when you're building a team, your EQ test will matter a lot, because skills can be taught, expertise can be built, but EQ is very hard to build, right? So I would personally sit for at least 1 hour with every new potential hire, understanding their emotional quotient, right? What motivates them in life? How do they look at startup? Do they feel risk? And how does risk even excite them, right? So one huge advantage being a female founder, you can actually leverage your own understanding of people, and hence build people who are in return very good with other people, right? Because ultimately, as a founder, what you need is to make yourself redundant, right? Moving to the next slide, what really we do different, the way we innovate is straight from material to the way we design products, right? So if you look at the one on the left, it's actually pineapple leaf. So we're a vegan brand. We don't use leather at all. I think the concept of leather in shoes is no more needed, right? So as long as there are good substitute that does the same thing as leather does, we can let go of leather and we can let some animals live in peace, right? As we move to the other two slides, you can see how versatile styles can be. So the middle style is actually inspired by sari. I'm wearing one today, purely out of the love for sari. I was like, how sari is so forgiving in terms of your size, right? It never says small, medium, large, right? So we were trying to think, how do we bring that kind of inclusiveness in shoes as well? This particular style, what we call is a sari inspired style, can be worn in multiple ways. The one on the extreme right is my favorite, right? So I call it drunk on alcohol. So a lot of times what happens is we are very excited early in the evening and we wear our heels, but somehow within 1 hour, we want to just take them off, right? The idea was, why take them off? Why not convert them? I mean, there are convertible cars that adapt. So we wanted to build a convertible shoe where you can change the heel height, and what was something a high heel for the evening could become like a beautiful, comfortable flat for the evening, for the later evening, right? Now, how did we arrive at this product market fit, right? So even before we started the brand, we actually did a 6 months research into the shape of Indian women feet, right? Just the anatomy of it, right? So we had a team of ortho specialists who scanned 3,000 Indian feet just to understand what is it to design for Indian women, right? Now that kind of research and development usually young companies don't do, but I fundamentally believe that when you want to like rebuild a category, you have to spend enough time researching about it, right? Has that research helped us? Hell yes. I mean, 19% of our consumers come back for their second pair of shoes within 90 days. In a category like footwear, stickiness is possible to build because the cost or the inconvenience of trying a new brand is very high for a consumer, right? So if you're able to impress a consumer with your fit, shape, comfort, all of it, they tend to come back. And that's why this category proved to be such an amazing kickstart for us. 20% of our styles get 60% of our revenue. So I'm talking about cash cow, right? We also have a very proprietary data plus design mechanism of building our product line. It's very similar to how Jay-Z would design his music, right? So if you break down music into sub components, there are some repetitive elements that keep coming by. That's why if you hear 70s music, you can see a certain similarities in the whole era, right? Similar mechanism, which is where you take design and data together and you build a way by which product development or new product innovation becomes a lot more easier within the company. Next, if you had to like compare ourselves with like other brands, I would say Monroe would be like a love child of Steve Madden and Clarks, and much more affordable, right? And that's where we sit, right? Now, being an elder millennial myself, I knew one of my strengths very well, and that was brand building, right? I personally happen to have Instagram influencing power, primarily over health, lifestyle. So I was like, wow, if I can have that voice, can that brand also have that voice? So if you go check us out on Instagram, you'll actually see a wide spectrum of really cool women wearing Monroe shoes. None of them have been paid for. And that's the power of organic brand building in today's time, right? Of course, there is Katrina Kaif and Anushka Sharma who have also worn Monroe shoes, and a bunch of influencers, right? So whether it is Neelu Thapa, who's a fashion influencer, Swati of Cash Karo, who's actually a woman founder, we wanted our community to be represented by diverse set of women who hustle and want to be comfortable, right? There is good repeat data happening. So if you look at some of our loyal customers, they end up buying roughly 7 products within 3 months. I'm talking about Tabassum, right? The reason why I'm giving some of these examples so that the audience here can understand that if you pick a right category where you create product market fit, it is possible to create repeated revenue without getting into this matrix of CAC, right? If you're in a business where you constantly have to acquire new customers to sustain, it's a very difficult business, especially a brand business, right? So for a D2C brand, it's very important to track your repeat and also see if you're getting it right, like build that process up well. So for us, we get the fit right. So we are scaling that part up, right? Moving to the last slide, I want to talk about a bit how I have survived this journey, right? So I think so I have a beautiful video. I'm just going to play that out. So by the way, that is me on my 48-hour vacation to Puri. And sometimes when you're so passionate, you can't differentiate whether you're working or chilling, right? So here it was me on the beach, and I had worn these pair of new thread collection which Monroe had launched. And I didn't realize when I went from being a photographer, content creator to like a founder who was just on a vacation, right? And that is what passion does to you. You don't know whether you're working or chilling, right? And the reason I wanted to share this slide is it matters a lot. This journey is extremely hard. I can't even tell you the number of times I've had teary eyes, right? Because it feels like you're a boxer in a ring where you don't know where you're going to get punched from, right? Passion is my painkiller, right? There's so much of joy I derive out of doing what I do at Monroe that somehow the joy ratio becomes much higher, and I constantly keep upping myself as an entrepreneur. So I keep upping my skill set, right? And I think if you have something which you're very passionate about, see if you can make money out of it, right? And if you are making money out of it, keep getting good at it, because there's a lot to be done there, right? Passion has been my anchor for my career. And a lot of times people say that you have so much energy. It's also because Monroe helps me regenerate my energy. So at the end of a good day, I'm actually very refreshed that I have not only channelized my passion, but I've also enabled a bunch of more people to think like that, right? On that note, I hope some of us also manage to identify what our painkillers would be on this entrepreneurial journey. Thank you so much for hearing me out. And just like how I feel so comfortable in my own skin, my vision is to make this contagious, right? There is power to feeling comfortable within yourself, right? Thank you so much.
Thank you, Veena, for that wonderful journey. I would say, and excited to get back to you end of this session to when we do a Q&A and understand a little bit more. But very interesting what you said about how home served and your growing up years literally served as an incubation slash accelerator center for you, and how important it is to absolutely love what you do. And I think that's the common connect that got Marvi and Bhamini together, who were, colleagues previously and then literally became friends. And I'm sure even you couldn't differentiate whether you were colleagues first or friends first, or even if that differentiation mattered, like Veena said. So over to you, Bhamini, to tell us more about Big Fat Phoenix and what you're building there.
Thanks, Anjali, and thank you, Veena, for that. That was a brilliant presentation, and it really resonated with me, and I'm sure with Morvi and many of us here who are on our own passion courses. Because Morvi and I are two of the founders in a larger founding team, as we mentioned, at Big Fat Phoenix. And the thing that really unites all of us is our passion again for video games, for the incredible fun that we have playing them and building them, and also the potential that we see that video games can do more. So we think that games are naturally spaces where learning can and already does occur. And that while kids are having an incredible immersive experience, they can, parents can also see value in that. And instead of saying, hey, get back to your books and study, parents will want their kids to play more from games that are doing more. And the hope that we have isn't as far-fetched as some people might think. A lot of brands have done this in their own mediums without changing the fundamental nature of that medium. And these are some instances of those. Sesame Street, it's a bonkers, crazy, fun show. It's bright and colorful and happy, but it also deals with very deep and complex issues like conflict, like inclusivity, like ethicality. And parents are happy to share those experiences with their kids. Lego is a toy. You build things, you break things, but it's recognized as something which enhances your STEM skills and develops creativity. Closer to home, Amar Chitra Katha is a comic book. And comic books can be perceived as picture books and not value for time. But in India, parents are happy to expose their kids to Amar Chitra Katha rather than Batman, where they're looking at the clock and saying, get back to work. They're like, here, take this and be exposed to Indian mythologies and histories that you might not otherwise be interested in. And that's what we at Big Fat Phoenix are attempting to do as a brand. Television, toys, and comic books were perceived to not have value for children, but certain brands have created that value for parents while still being fundamentally fun first experiences. So at Big Fat Phoenix, what we're trying to do is just that with video games. Fundamentally extraordinary fun, but with more layered in and more surface to the player. And I'll toss it to Morvi now to take you through that more. Hey, Morvi, you're on mute.
Yeah, I'll fix it. So like Bhamini said, we believe that games can be really powerful avenues to drive incredible learning moments. And we also feel that certain types of games can be really, really powerful emotional sandboxes. And how do they do that? Is because games can when you're playing a game, any game, you are immediately putting yourself in the shoes of another person and seeing the world through their eyes, right? You are experiencing scenarios and situations which you may not have experienced before. And most importantly, you are making decisions and seeing the impact of those decisions play out in a very, very safe environment. So, which drives a lot of experimentation, which is super important for learning. So we feel for these reasons that games can be really, really powerful drivers for social and emotional learning, right? And now social emotional learning is a really broad term. The specific subset of that we are going after is these 6 key ways of acting, thinking, and feeling, which we feel are really valuable to children and that we as designers feel that we can surface really well in our games, right? So things that help kids develop really strong interpersonal skills like kindness, like perspective taking, right? Things that help children be more responsible citizens of the world that they live in, right? So things like ethical decision making, and also skills that help kids reach their personal goals. So growth mindset, how do you bounce back from failure, responsibility, self-regulation, managing impulses, and so on. So we're weaving these behaviors through our games, and we're grounding these games in themes that we feel are relevant to kids and that parents will see value in. And we've identified these themes through a lot of, we're constantly playtesting and talking to kids and parents. So themes that we believe kids will find fun have emerged from these conversations. So things like environmental awareness, like it's something that can get like 11-year-olds really, really excited, right? Leadership, kids love being in control, right? They love to take charge. They love to be like supreme imperial of nation, you know. And our games help them do exactly that, right? We're dealing with themes like so super relatable to everyday lives of children in school. So ideas like bullying, that's something we're testing right now, and it's like really resonating with children. So together, these goals and these themes come together to form these super fun, very immersive experiences, because at the core of whatever we do, it has to be fun first, right? Because otherwise we will not meet any of these lofty goals that we're stating. What we also really want to do is have our games bring parents and kids together. And we're doing this by consciously designing for loops where parents can be in the play space together. But we also want to surface the learning and design in ways that sparks interesting conversations between parents and children. And that's again something that is incredibly exciting and it's coming up in our playtesting. We are designing for children and for social emotional learning, right? Which is tricky. So we feel like we have immense responsibilities as designers to ground our work in existing research and make sure it aligns with best practices that are out there. We have a fantastic panel of advisors who are looped in and whose feedback we take regularly on everything that we're doing. And most importantly, two of our core pillars are accessibility and inclusivity, right? Like Veena was talking about inclusivity in the design of her products. It's super important when you're doing anything. So we want our players to feel represented in our games and in our game worlds. We also want to build up to a system where we're designing with accessibility in mind so that players of different abilities don't feel left behind in the way we design our games.
This year is the first product that we're working on that should be out soon. It's called the Fairside Project. It's a library of games that all sit in the same universe, a fictional universe of Fairside. And these games are all of different play patterns or play styles. One might be a choice-based narrative game. One might be a card battler game. One might be a nurture game. Games that different people will enjoy these different types of games. But in each of these games, the actions that you take in these games will impact the game world and impact the game characters. So and those will feed into an external persona or profile that will then feed back into the actions that are available to you in the games later on. So for instance, if you take 10 Turn President, if I'm super kind to a character in 10 Turn President, I might develop support with them. They might become my friend. They might like me more. And I can learn more about what friendliness means and what kindness looks like in real life. I might get prompts on how to transfer that knowledge in real life when I go to my persona. And then when I go back to the game world, because that character is my friend now, they might give me, they might tell me a secret. They might give me a gift or a boon because they're my friend now and they like me. So you can see how your actions actually impact people in that safe space of the game. Similarly, if you're unkind, people just might withhold information and not want to talk to you anymore. And so you can see what negative actions also have in that world. The holy grail is, of course, transference into reality and into your everyday interactions. So we follow a principle of play, where you're having an incredible amount of fun playing these games. Learn, where you go into your persona and you go deeper dives into what all of these things mean. And you apply not just in the game world, but also in real life, where you can watch the news and point at your parents and say, oh, wasn't that an unethical thing to do? Or you can say, hey, that person was really friendly at the supermarket. So that's the holy grail for the way that we're thinking about our products. And when it comes to the games themselves, we're not reinventing the wheel here. Games are naturally already fun and learning experiences. If you play a platformer and you try and make a jump 4 times in a row and you keep failing, but you keep trying, you're already showing resilience. If you're playing a role-playing game and they ask you whether you want to kill someone or save someone, you're already showing ethicality. So what we do is we take games that already are emotionally resonant with us and which are fun to play and that have tested well with our age group of 8 to 14. And we distill the essence of what makes them emotionally resonant and what makes them fun. And we tie them in with the themes and intentionally design in order to bring out the learning context that we've been talking about. Our first, one of these games from this library is in beta right now in the Play Store, 10 Turn President. Please go check it out and give us your feedback because we'd love to hear it. On that note, this is the week. Us. So I'll toss it back to Murphy.
Right. So, talking about my personal journey to kind of get here, talking to you all today, it's been really, really unexpected. So, if somebody had like 15 years ago had told me that you will eventually end up working in games, I would have been really, really shocked because I used to be deep into biology academia. I was studying genetics and molecular biology, and I was like down the road of a PhD and like just like on that path, right? And like Veena was talking about the joy ratio, right? And at some point, before I got even deeper into it, I realized that the path that I was headed down was not bringing me any joy. And that made me take a step back and start to think really critically about the systems of education, right? And the systems that I had interacted with in my childhood. And how they kind of put the focus on certain goals which are important, but they also put you on a conveyor belt without really giving you the critical thinking skills that are necessary to think about some of these life choices in holistic ways, right? Especially when you're at such a young age. So I decided to give it all up and I started working in education. And it's really been one of the best decisions I've ever made, because since then, for the last 12 years, I've had like some incredible opportunities to like work with and learn from some of the most like best loved kids media brands in the world, right? I have worked with Sesame Street, bringing their show to the radio for rural Indian audiences. I've worked on like with IBM Research on doing AI for language learning. I've worked with like kids in rural India and getting them ready for school. I've worked on the Disney Byju's Early Learn product. And what I have realized through all of these experiences is that we're socialized from really young ages to start to think of learning and education as an intellectual pursuit. When you are like, especially in my experience working with kids, spending so much time with children, you realize that it really has to be reimagined as an emotional one, right? Because it's only when you are emotionally charged is when true learning and growth can take place, especially at such critical periods of your lives, right? And these are some of the conversations we would have when Bhamini and me and like some of our core team was working together at Byju's, and we would like, think about like play and the immense capacity it has to really drive some really central questions of like identity and self-discovery, right? And that's the fun part about now what we're doing at Big Fat Phoenix. You get to every single day work and think about like have kids really explore some really key things that relate to their everyday lives, right? Things like ethics and fairness in like big and small spaces in their world, things like kindness and empathy, right? We consciously get to talk about that as a team, as a culture, right? Like we're talking about empathy for kids. Where is the empathy in our work environment? So it's been a really, really powerful like exploration of these ideas at Big Fat Phoenix. I'm really excited about what we're building and really, really happy to be here to talk to you all about it.
So that's a tough journey to follow, but I'll give it my best shot. Like Morvi said, we met at Byju's, where a lot of the members of our core team were, but we found so much synergy and passion and purpose over there that we ended up being co-founders at Big Fat Phoenix Interactive. Looking back on my journey, it seems like a pretty clear path that I am where I am today. But at every point along the way, it seemed like I was diverging wildly away from my path, just like Morvi. In fact, I did my undergrad in economics at St. Stephen's College. And at that point of time, I actually thought that I would be on the other side of this conversation as a VC. But while I was at St. Stephen's, I realized that there was this lacuna, this complete lack of conversation and exposure to certain things that seemed fundamental and necessary in both my peers and myself. Conversations around privilege, about class, caste, gender, sexual hierarchies, conversations around inequities. And I found that learning graphs and game theory weren't exactly valuable in giving me exposure to those experiences. In fact, the most learning I had ever done came from the entertainment that I had consumed. Buffy the Vampire Slayer exposed me to strong, powerful women and normalized bisexuality before I knew it could be a problem to some people. Archie Comics taught me the value of friendship. And like we've been talking about, video games are such immersive and interactive experiences where you get feedback that they were almost transformative to the way that I saw myself in the world. Tamagotchis taught me how to be responsible and care for a living being. Road Rash was formative in my childhood, where you play as a biker, but it showed me that even women biker chicks can be just as scrappy and frankly badass as male bikers. And so women really can do anything. And right now I'm playing Fire Emblem Three Houses, not sponsored, but I think that everyone who is or aspires to be in a leadership role has to play that game, because it's a game in which you have a squad that goes into do battle. But in thinking about your squad, you need to think about each member of the team, what their innate talents are, what you eventually want to grow them into, how to take them along that path, and the importance of building support and camaraderie among members of your team so that they do better when they go to battle together. So I strongly believe in this potential that video games have because I've experienced it. So I did a master's in media and cultural studies at TIS because I wanted to go into this field. But then I found myself working at another startup, QMath, making math-based comic books. Then at Byju's, I led the integration of Disney into the Disney Byju's Early Learn product. And that's where I met some wonderful people who also saw that incredible potential in video games. And that's what we're hopefully doing now. Because entertainment has the capacity to really shape and change your belief systems and your behaviors. And we're looking at kids where it's not just something that is necessary, it's something that the market is also waking up to and wanting right now, because conversations about inclusivity, social emotional learning are happening all over the world, and it's happening a lot in our target audience of the United States. So we find that our passion and our purpose align with the need and a want that's there in the world. So we're really happy to be doing what we're doing. Every day is fun. And if you're not having fun, like Veena said, you shouldn't be doing the thing that you're doing. So that's us. You can get in touch with us and we're happy to take any questions that you have later on.
Amazing. Thanks for that, Bhavani and Marvi and Veena. I was just trying to collect all the for coming. You spoke wonderfully about your passion for fashion, as well as how coming from a traditional Marwari family gave you ancestral wisdom about doing business, right? Along your founder journey, what have been some of these common myths that you've had to, bust, whether it's women in fashion or whether you can go out and like start your own, do your own thing. But what are some of the myth busting that you had to do along the way?
Oof, I have to only tell a few. So let's pick the big ones, right?
We can extend this session, not a problem. Yeah.
Yeah, so I'll tell you the ones which are just coming on top of my mind, right? First, whenever I've had an investor call, first I give a maths test just to clear that I know numbers, right? Which I think originates from a perception bias towards beautiful women. So somehow, I mean, I don't know where this is coming from, but there is some sort of a bias that happens when you see a very beautiful woman. I'm not saying I'm one, I'm just saying it happens. You tend to doubt if they know numbers very well, right? In my case, just to let you know, I was like a cost accounting topper of 12th. I, specialized in finance. I'm exceptionally good with numbers. So that test just didn't feel like anything. But over a period of time, and repetitively, I kept doing maths test right after my pitch deck. I was like, wait, why am I doing this maths test every time? So I think that was first myth. But my approach towards myth is myth has accumulated due to a long sustained perception. The way you break a myth is you create a counter reply to it, which is a skill, right? Not just an opinion, but it's a skill. So I have honed my finance skills so strong that I'm hoping I will create diversion in this myth, right? Second myth that happens a lot to me is oh, your father is a businessman, your husband is also a tech entrepreneur, why are you doing this? And I'm like, wait, like these are two different individuals and I'm another individual, right? And I think what happens is they're basically saying, as a woman, if you're surrounded by successful men, which is, let's say, your father or your husband, what is the need for you to hustle so hard, right? And I have heard this myth straight from like a watchman of a shoe factory to, let's say, somehow a friend at an investor community, right? And the way I'm breaking that myth is consistently working at it, right? It's been roughly 4 years I'm building Monroe. You don't do such things unless you deeply feel for it, right? And very few people can relate with it because in Maslow's hierarchy, once your needs are fulfilled, you move to desires. And unfortunately, very few move to that level. And I had the privilege to be at that level, right? So yeah, for me, the way I'm breaking that myth is I'm consistently doing what I'm doing so that people realize that there could be a segment of women who could be very well abundant, but still build their own wealth, right? So I think these two myths I have experienced personally.
Amazing. And Marvi, in fact, you showed us this beautiful assortment of games that you're building, and Bhamini and you were taking us through the various themes that you were dwelling on. And just continuing from what Veena was saying, you both are in this incredibly powerful and this position of responsibility where you can actually influence those behaviors in children, right? And through their formative years, 8 to 14, you mentioned. But as you think about game design, do you think about these, again, gender stereotypes and gender biases that kind of weave their way into it? And take us a little bit through, how do you go about designing games at FBFP, and how do you ensure that these, blind spots are covered?
Right. So, I mean, we end up talking about this a lot because as people who work in games and as women who work in games, this question of like gender in games and what, a lot of questions about like, hey, women tend to kind of favor certain play patterns over others, and and do we consciously design for that, is something that comes up a lot in conversations. And we firmly believe that play is inherently gender neutral, right? And like you're talking about the socialization of young children, right? We feel that a lot of the media that kids are exposed to, and like their formative experiences from the minute that they're born, like starting from like pink balloons on your hospital door, like literally when you're brought in as an infant, right? That's where what starts to push the journey towards pushing you into certain boxes, and we don't want to lean into that, right? Because we feel like we have a certain responsibility as kids media designers to like not add to that. What we are really focused on doing is designing for inclusivity. So we want to design for as diverse ways as possible, so that all sorts of players feel included and represented in our games. They feel seen in our games, but we don't necessarily want like these gendered boxes to be a part of
And it really helps. It's that 50% of our team right now is women, and the majority of the designers on our team are women. If you build an inclusive space, if you build an inclusive organization, the products that you create will tend to take the energy and the ethics and the goals of that organization into themselves. So rather, like Morvi was saying, we're not trying to pitch pink games and blue games and things like that to kids. We're pitching things that we enjoy. And we have a very diverse space that's creating those games. So the hope is that in this library, whoever the kid is, they will find something that they enjoy.
Yeah. And it's interesting that you mentioned that almost 50% of your team, and including the extended founding team, it's all women, right? Many of us have not had that experience of having like a 50-50 women's team. And one of the myths, Veena, typically, especially for me coming from the venture world, is this entire thing around single founder, right? And also that we have BFP here, that's a multiple. I think you both are literally on opposite sides of the spectrum. We have a single founder with Monroe, and then we have 6 of you at BFP. So, how have you gone about changing perception? And more importantly, you've spent a long time in the professional world working for some of the largest, global fashion brands. And culturally, how have you taken some of, your time spent there, and as you're building out your own brand and your own company, what are you keeping and what are you looking to change?
So, Anjali, the single founder thing, I didn't even realize before I started interacting with investors. Because before that, nobody 52% of listed companies are single founder. So it's not that it is evidently out there. The alpha gene is the one that dominates the world, right? So I don't know if you've seen the Simba movie. There's only one Simba that is being raised, not like a bunch of them, right? So in my head, this never even crossed, right? So I started building Monroe, and of course, I started by myself, and there are a bunch of people, and we are building it together. So I think this is a subset of people who think that way. The world doesn't think that way. The consumer doesn't think that way. When you get listed, nobody thinks like that, right? So I think it's just a subset of a bunch of people who think like that, right? So I think it doesn't bother me much, but it has made me a ruthless delegator, right? So I delegate like a fine queen. So I identify that I can't do everything. I don't have time for it. And that kind of brings a very different kind of team. So today at Monroe, even if, let's say, you talk to a senior growth manager, trust me, you won't differentiate whether it's the founder talking or senior growth manager talking, right? And that happens, when you are a single founder, right? Also, single mother, single woman, you attach single to any woman, it will create discomfort. So I'm fine, I'm creating some discomfort, and I think it's a good discomfort to create, right? Coming to your second part of question, which you said, after, let's say, working at Tommy Hilfiger and Versace, what would I like to keep? I think both these brands are world-renowned brands, right, at different price points. And what made me realize that brands can be built at different price points, right? So Tommy Hilfiger was in a $30 to $40 range, and Versace was at a 3,000, 4,000 range, right? That opened a spectrum for me, right? And what matters is brand building, right? So I think the power of brand building stuck to me. What I would like to leave, I think Devil Wears Prada is an outdated thing. Kind women wear Monroe, and that's what I'm trying to build. Right? There's a there's a perception around fashion that, if you're in it, you got to be snooty and like, no, I think that's a very outdated concept, right? I believe that the way you are is actually your fashion. And yeah, that's what I want to like not build and build it differently than those two companies.
Yeah, and I think Marvi, during our pre-chat, you were mentioning that one of the beautiful things about being a founder is that you literally get to make all choices yourself. Like everything as basic as deciding what the coffee machine should be to literally about who you want to hire and culture setting. So all those choices are yours, and you're starting out from a clean slate. So from a culture building perspective, and as you move from like seed to scale and then growth, what have been some of these decisions and some of these inflection points, and just take us through how are you building culture at BFP as you're literally setting out to make these decisions. Take us through what runs in your mind here.
So when it comes to startups, one of the big mistakes that we don't want to make is build product first and build culture later. Because unless culture is there, unless you're thinking about how you want to build your team and how you want your team to be with each other, by the time you start scaling, you won't have a culture to scale. By the time you hit that funding, there won't be any value system that's underpinning the way that you want to use those funds and the way that you want to build that team out into a larger ecosystem. So at Big Fat Phoenix, we spend as much time thinking about product as we spend thinking about culture. For instance, when we go about building a product, we think of pillars. We have product pillars. These are the experiences that we want the user to feel. We go about specific pillars for specific features. When they're using the rewards feature, these are the feelings that we want the player to feel. When they're looking at the persona, they want to look at themselves and say, oh, I feel represented. We also set about designing for our games ethical pillars. What are the things that we think are necessary to, as responsible creators, creating media that is going to be consumed by young people? What are the ethical pillars that we want underpinning our product? And it ranges from things like, we don't want to emphasize that greed is good. Sometimes it's okay. More is not always best at the cost if it is war, for example, and there's loss of life. Feminism in its concept of inclusivity and diversity is respected and essential, is fundamental to the way that we want to build out our products. Our cast of characters has everyone from genderqueer folks to people of different ethnicities and different abilities. We have a girl in a wheelchair. So we think through making people feel represented. And while we were building out these ethical pillars, we found that these were actually fundamental to who we were as people, the principles that we wanted to embody in the company, not just in the products that we're building. So those ethical pillars are part of onboarding anyone onto the team as something that we're constantly measuring, not just our features against, but also our interpersonal interactions and behaviors with each other against. And when we keep thinking about culture also, there's always like certain companies have a culture fit test, right? Where they want you to fit into things so it moves cohesively. And there's a lot of value in finding people who share your drive, your purpose, and your principles. But we want to create a diverse space. We don't want 12 carbon copies of Bhamini Lakshminarayan and Morvi Sharma, because then it's the same ideas bouncing around like an echo chamber. We, as a culture, we want people who disagree with us, but have the same kindness and generosity and ethics in conveying that disagreement. So that's things that we think about while hiring also.
And this I mean, it's a constant through line of our process, right? That the world building that we are doing for kids in our product also should reflect in our world building as an organization, right? Because it's only when we design in a certain way and in a certain environment that we'll be able to, in organic ways, kind of infuse that in our product, right? Like we're literally designing the space that we want to work in also, not just a product. So we've been talking about it from day one.
Awesome. And just doing a quick time check. We have about 3 minutes. So just as a final question and just parting words, TIE, as you know, is really about fostering entrepreneurship and encouraging more and more women to set out their own and set up their own companies. So just what would be your just parting words and just to wrap the session up in terms of, words of encouragement, I would say, for, women out there like looking to start up?
Okay. I have one thing I've learned in this entire journey is that leadership looks different on every single person. And this is something that we've also discovered when we were researching our products, when we were looking at concepts of leadership and stuff, until like this, and Morbi like pitch in and like tell me if I'm getting this right, but until the 70s or something like that, the idea of masculinity was actually listed in those frameworks of what leadership are. Now, even the word, and now, even though you might not use the word, characteristics that are considered to be masculine are valued more than other characteristics. I'm always getting at the same time, I'm always getting feedback about how I need to be smiling more and friendlier, because as a personality type, I'm quite assertive. So, because that conforms to certain notions of what femininity are. So leadership looks different on every single person. So you don't need to subscribe to that. You need to go out there, kick some butt, take a chance. It's going to be hard. Take a chance, kick some butt. Everybody doesn't have to be your friend, but you need to do the best job that you can so that you can show yourself and other women around you that it takes all types and it takes all sorts to succeed.
And everything that Bhamini said, and to add to that, just like surround yourself with other incredible, smart women out there doing amazing things, because that will give you different diverse models of what leadership can look like, right? It'll make you realize that it's okay to be yourself, and it'll just like give you a lot of confidence. That has been my personal journey, at Big Fat Phoenix and before.
So yeah, Anjali, I think one thing which I want to share for women entrepreneur, aspiring women entrepreneur, talk about your achievement. I'm talking of chest thumping, right? Like, why not? If you've achieved something, you got to talk about it, even if it might look small perspective wise, but it is big for you. So start sharing your achievement, right? Like, take ownership like an alpha, right? And trust me, alpha doesn't have a gender. So I think it's good that we leave our own perception biases so that we create diversion.
Absolutely. I think alpha doesn't have a gender is how we will end the session this afternoon. Thank you so much, Veena, and would encourage everyone here to get onto the Monroe website and pick out their shoes today. And Bhamini, Marvi, all the very best as you set out to build Big Fat Phoenix. And literally, we hope that you change like a generation of women as they play your games. And thank you so much for being honest with your point of view. And let's hope that we celebrate, women and women founders not just on one day but every day. So thank you so much for your time, and thanks again to the TIE Bangalore team for facilitating this. Thanks everyone. Bye bye.
Thank you.
Thank you, Anjali. Thank you, Ty.